Imagine an empire that believed it could control the wind. Not with machines, not with science, but with paper. In 1323, two powers, one ruling the Nile, the other ruling the sea, signed a treaty so obsessed with weather, routes and seasons that historians now call it a medieval climate pact. Yet almost no one outside specialist circles has heard of it. Here's the strange part. Its logic looks frighteningly familiar, because what they were really fighting over wasn't storms or sand or sails. It was control over a warming world's most precious resource, predictable climate. So who were these climate negotiators before climate science? On one side, the Mamluk Sultanate ruling Egypt, Syria, and the Red Sea, gatekeepers of Nile grain and Indian Ocean spices. On the other, Venice, the merchant republic whose entire power rested on ships catching the right winds at the right time. They weren't talking about carbon. They were talking about wind seasons, desert routes, and which harbors would open or close when storms rolled in. 700 years ago, they acted like today's energy superpowers. To see why, we need to rewind to a crisis the climate had already started. Between 1310 and 1320, the weather went mad. Across northern Europe, endless rain rotted crops. The Great Famine of 1315-1317 killed millions. At the same time, the eastern Mediterranean felt the onset of the Little Ice Age. Cooler temperatures, weird rainfall, unstable harvests. Grain prices spiked. Cities panicked. Everyone suddenly cared about where food came from and how reliably winds and currents could deliver it. Venice depended on sailing through the Adriatic across the Mediterranean to reach Alexandria. But that wasn't the only problem. The land routes that fed the ports were equally fragile, and one empire sat on all of them. The Mamluk Sultanate, founded by former slave soldiers, controlled a climate jackpot. They held Egypt's Nile harvests. They taxed caravans crossing Sinai and Syria. They oversaw Red Sea ports funneling Indian Ocean spices to the Mediterranean. Every grain shipment, every pepper sack, every bale of cotton depended on monsoon cycles, desert winds, and Nile floods. To Venetians, that meant one thing. Whoever ruled Cairo ruled the weather that fed Europe. But Venice had leverage too. Their galleys and merchant convoys, organized fleets called muda, could choose which ports to enrich or starve. Conflict was inevitable. Before they signed peace, they tried something else. War. From the late 1200s, Venice and its Genoese rivals fought bitterly over eastern trade. The Mamluks, meanwhile, were at war with Crusader remnants and Mongol invasions. Sea lanes became battlefields. Convoys were ambushed. Insurance costs, yes, medieval merchants insured cargo, shot upward. When ships avoided dangerous routes, entire regions saw fewer imports and less grain. Military power was literally steering the climate of commerce. Then something unexpected happened. Everyone realized constant conflict was bad business. In the early 1300s, Venice and the Mamluks began negotiating a new kind of weapon: law. In 1323, a detailed treaty was concluded between the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad and the Republic of Venice. On the surface, it was about trade rights. But look closer. Article after article worried about when ships could sail, which seasonal winds they'd rely on, and what happened if storms delayed convoys. The treaty specified where Venetians could live in Alexandria, how they'd be taxed, and where warehouses would store their goods. Protected from humidity, floods, even fire. It was a blueprint to stabilize a chaotic environment. In effect, they were trying to control the wind with ink. Why call this a weather pact? Because both sides treated climate patterns as infrastructure. Venetian ships depended on predictable Mediterranean winds. Mamluk caravans depended on survivable desert heat and oases. Red Sea routes depended on Indian Ocean monsoons. So the treaty reduced uncertainty everywhere else. Standard taxes, fixed legal procedures, guaranteed protection for merchants, cutting the risks that storms and drought couldn't. If they couldn't command the sky, they'd control everything below it. It's the same logic behind today's climate agreements. You can't negotiate with the atmosphere, so you negotiate with each other. Look at where this pact focused. Choke points. Venice wanted secure access to Alexandria, the Nile Delta's gateway. The Mamluks wanted control over grain and spices riding monsoon winds from the Indian Ocean. Whoever ruled these nodes didn't need to own the wind. They just had to decide who could use its power. Centuries later, the logic barely changed. Today, it's the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the South China Sea. Instead of galleys, we have tankers. Instead of spices and grain, oil and gas. But that wasn't the only echo across time. Just 2 decades later, another disaster hit, the Black Death, beginning around 1347. Plague rode the same trade networks the treaty had stabilized. Ships that once carried grain and silk now carried Yersinia pestis. Populations collapsed. Labor shortages reshaped economies. Climate, disease, and trade were suddenly entangled. Sounds familiar? Today, warming alters disease patterns, disrupts agriculture, and destabilizes migration. Medieval rulers watched their carefully balanced system shatter under forces they only dimly understood. And yet, even after catastrophe, they kept renegotiating. The idea that you could manage environmental shock with legal agreements refused to die. Venice doubled down. In the 1400s and 1500s, it struck similar agreements with other powers, the Byzantine Empire, later the Ottomans. Every deal revolved around routes, harbours, and seasons. The Venetians understood something crucial. In a world at the mercy of wind and current, paperwork could act like technology. A treaty could be as powerful as a new sail design. Fast forward, and the pattern holds. Modern shipping lanes, insurance, and maritime law are all descendants of this mindset. Treating oceans and atmosphere as semi-fixed assets to be allocated, priced, and controlled. Here's where it starts to look uncomfortably modern. In the 20th century, the same geographic corridor the Mamluks once ruled, Egypt, the Red Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean, became an energy superhighway. Instead of caravans with spices, we built pipelines and oil terminals. Instead of arguing over grain convoys, states argued over tanker routes. The 1956 Suez Crisis, the closure of the canal after 1967, the 1973 oil embargo, each one reshaped global energy flows. Just like in 1323, whoever controlled the choke point controlled the climate-relevant resource. First food, then fossil fuel. But there's a twist. Medieval Venetians and Mamluks didn't know their system was altering the climate. We do. Every tanker through Suez, every refinery along coastal zones, adds greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And now, new choke points are emerging. Lithium deposits, cobalt mines, rare earth processing plants. Control over sun-rich deserts and wind-rich coastlines is becoming as strategic as control over oil. Instead of controlling the trade winds, states fight to control the turbines that harvest them. It's the same game, just with different fuel and much higher stakes. So what about climate treaties today? Paris, Kyoto, COP meetings? They look global, modern, scientific. But underneath, they echo that 1323 logic. Rich states promise funding. Vulnerable states demand protection. Everyone hopes paper can stabilize a turbulent atmosphere. Yet power imbalances remain. In the 14th century, Venice used its fleets to secure favorable terms. Now, major emitters and finance hubs wield economic and technological leverage. We're still trying to control the wind by regulating everything around it. Who emits, who pays, who adapts, and who's left exposed. Here's the uncomfortable question. Are we actually solving climate change, or just rewriting that medieval pact for a hotter world? Back then, the safest option was to share the winds. Venice and the Mamluks learned that trying to monopolize routes risked famine and revolt. Today, attempts to hoard green technology or secure exclusive access to critical minerals could trigger new conflicts. History suggests one thing clearly. When the atmosphere becomes a battlefield, nobody really wins. But there's one more twist to this story, and it's about us. The 1323 pact between Venice and the Mamluk Sultanate didn't stop storms, droughts, or plague. But it showed a dangerous confidence. The belief that clever humans can out-negotiate nature. 700 years later, we still write treaties, build fleets, and fight over invisible forces: wind, heat, carbon. The real question isn't whether empires can control the climate. It's whether we can control ourselves. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unknown, subscribe for more uninteresting history.